So I'm Terry Hickel. I am your state representative. I hope for a little while longer. I'm not sure the national news will help me, but I'm really pleased to be. So that's another whole issue. But I'm really pleased to be here. I'm super proud of the Rotary. You've done good work, and especially with our kids and our impact projects. So just a real fan of the Rotary Club. And then I'm also super fans of these two gentlemen that I get to introduce. And they will just illustrate that you can really change the world if you have a safe environment for conversation. And conversation can really, shape lives. And I've seen it firsthand in our leadership program. So I'd like to introduce John McIntosh. I actually met John through his dad, Mike McIntosh. Does anybody remember Mike? Yeah, a great leader. And so Mike is the one that convinced me to become the executive director of Advancing Leadership, which was brought by Tom Vander Ark. It was his idea. And so I became the director, and I was looking for someone to communicate a good message across the lines, and he recommended his son John, and he said, John's a really good speaker. In fact, he's a little better than me, but I'm still a better writer. But I got to know John and grabbed him, and he's been on the board ever since. John is the lead pastor of Grace Church. He is the chaplain for the Federal Way Police, and he's also a board member for Advancing Leadership. And I know a lot of our folks, if they're hurting or if they're happy, they call John. He married 2 of our ALY kids in June, and then had a memorial service for one of our ALY alums in July. So he's just a great leader. And Lawrence, I had the privilege, and John was from the first AL class, the best class ever, 1999. That's what he'll say, right? Where's Brian Wilson? And then I met Lawrence, and actually Lawrence was introduced to Advancing Leadership through John. And he just had a very special spark. He just connects with people, and especially our high school kids. And I grabbed him and put him in front of the kids, and I knew that I met my replacement. So Lawrence has been the executive director of Advancing Leadership for 2 years now, and his job is to take that leadership program and raise it, and he's doing just that. So again, I think that they're going to illustrate that if you feel safe and you have comfort in a conversation, that you can break down barriers, stereotypes, and change the world. So I'd like to introduce John McIntosh and Lawrence Garrett.
So I shared with Lane that I didn't realize John and I were part of the marketing arm for today's Rotary, of how many guests came today. So I don't know, do I get like Rotarian points for this of some sort, right? Well, Lane will probably be in my office on what, Friday? Yeah, talking to me about this very thing. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for having me here. John and I go way back, and so I think it's appropriate, it's safe, and it's healthy for us two to do something like this. So thank you for that. I also want to extend a thank you to the Rotary. Way to go to have this kind of conversation now. That's right. On the preventative end. I want to thank all the, yeah, absolutely. That actually gives me time to get to my notes, so go ahead, keep clapping. I also want to thank the public officials that are here that decided to take out their time to invest and to learn, business leaders and community leaders alike. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So I have to admit that it's quite tempting. You guys are actually here to hear me speak. I know you're not here to hear me speak. It's the subject matter, no pun intended, that matters. It's the national dilemma that we're currently facing right now. And what do we do about it? And hopefully there's a realization that this isn't a quick fix answer. This isn't some kind of anecdotal, prescriptive, knee-jerk reaction of how we're going to be able to solve this thing. That hopefully there's a realization that what we're really dealing with here is systemic. And when we're talking about systemic issues, we can't focus on the fruit, we have to focus on the root. And so I'm going to share a couple of ideas and concepts, and I do want to let you know that I'm not a subject matter expert here, okay? John and I both talked about how did we even land here, right? We're not subject matter experts. As a matter of fact, I found out how I landed here was a Facebook quote.
Facebook stalker right there, yeah.
A Facebook quote. the very thing that I tell my AOY students, be careful to do, because you'll find yourself in a situation that you may not be prepared for, and voila, here I am, right? And so, but I do believe that though I'm not a subject matter expert, I do have a unique vantage point that I've kind of been across the spectrum when you're talking about encounters with the police department. And I want to share that journey with you guys about reconciliation, healing, hurt, and how we can do something about it. But before I go there, John, did you want to share a couple of things?
I just like listening. It was, I think Lawrence said very appropriately, it's a subject matter that draws us together. And when Lane approached us and said, will you come talk about Black Lives Matter? Lawrence and I responded the same way. What do we know about Black Lives Matter? Lawrence and I aren't here representing a position, and we're not here representing an organization. And I won't speak for Lawrence, but I'll tell you that I am a flawed individual of limited perspective who is trying hard to learn about things that are not natural to me or comfortable for me. And that's why I'm grateful that you're here. I'm happy to dialogue. I'm happy to share my perspective, but I don't pretend to be an expert. I think it's very encouraging that you are here in this room, perhaps to be uncomfortable. Because whenever we talk about things that separate us, the things that make us different, it's very easy for a wall to begin to rise up. And we're going to make this as safe a space as we possibly can. Lawrence is going to share his story. I'm going to share part of my story, a little bit of perspective. We're going to dialogue together. And if we leave here today having learned one thing, or having moved one step closer to a critical conversation, it's a win. We're not going to fix Federal Way or Washington or the United States or heal every divide today. But the fact that you are willing to be here and say, I want to be a part of moving that conversation forward is commendable. And
I had a couple, go, sorry.
Well, I was just going to make a joke, but now I'm not, because you just stole my thunder. It's all about the timing and the delivery.
We're still working on it. I mentioned earlier that John and I, we go far back. And I was spending some time thinking about the kind of conversations we've had over the years. I have to share with you that some of you guys would be very uncomfortable with the level of honesty and curiosity and fascination that we have about race, politics, culture, religion. And I wanted to find what are the fundamentals that makes this work, and hopefully we can extend it to you guys. And the first one is we come to each other to listen, not to talk. Right. And so the aim is for us to be students, not teachers. And so hopefully that through a dialogue here and then the dialogue that you choose to have outside of this room, that the primary focus of having these kind of conversations is to listen. I want to know more than what I currently know, and I need you to share that with me. The second thing is that we focus really on root issues. And what do I mean in particular? Because I think some people want to question, okay, so when you're talking about the current dilemma that we're facing right now with police, and specifically the African American community, what do you mean? This is what I mean. I don't know if more training is the answer. I don't know if more compliance on the African American is the answer. Not saying that it can't solve an issue, I just don't know if that's solving the problem. Because I don't know if the issue is really about a process, more so it's about a relationship. And if we can't address relational issues, there's no point of us talking about process issues. And so what I hope for everyone in the room who's had to grapple with this kind of conversation is that we choose to do a zoom out approach versus a zoom in. I don't even entertain those conversations, to be honest with you. When someone wants to get the specifics of a certain situation in this so-and-so city and this happened, for one reason is that I don't know all the details. I don't know all the facts. And nonetheless, will this conversation be fruitful in regards to reconciliation, relationship management, and the growth of our nation? And typically that answer is no. And the last thing that I love about this guy, and it's the hardest thing that I had to do, assume positive intent. That is the game changer right there. The struggle for me is that I want to judge people by their impact. You hurt me. But I want others to judge me by my intent. I didn't mean to. So we have to get there. How do we get there? It's conversations like these, and it's the willingness for us to be uncomfortable for the sake of growth. So I'm going to swing it back to you, John. So those are the three things that what makes us work is we choose to listen. So it's about expanding perspective, A. B, the real focus here is that we want to make sure we get to the root, not just talk about the fruit. And then the last thing is that we want to assume positive intent. And if we do those core ingredients, I think of what makes this work, it's a win. It's a win every time. So I'm going to go a little bit into my journey, or John, do you want? I'm good? Sweet. So
I thought you were going to tell the story when you were talking about the conversations we had about the phone call I got from you and your wife when you were in Barnes & Noble.
yeah, tell about it.
Lawrence calls me and goes, "Hey, John, we're in Barnes & Noble." I said, "Yeah?" He goes, "Yeah, we found this awesome book we're reading right now. We haven't even bought it yet. We're standing in the aisle reading it." I said, "That's awesome, Lawrence." He's a leadership book junkie. So I'm like, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh man, it's called Stuff White People Like." and he starts going down the list. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. Yeah, that's kind of true too. And so we bonded over that book.
Yeah.
And I've asked. So he just, yeah.
Go ahead. We're there. Let's go there.
I called him one day. I'm coming out of a movie, and this comes from a position of trust, right? You can have these kind of conversations when you build a relationship. And I said, "Lawrence, what is it about black people talking in movies? Did you see how quiet? Right? It's like, oh, you can't say that, right? You see how that just felt right? Oh my Lord, you did not."
I laughed.
I said, "What is? There's a cultural divide that I don't understand. People who look like me sit in movies and they go like this and they nod and maybe they cry and laugh a little bit. And in front of me is a row of people having the time of their lives, screaming at the movie, throwing their popcorn, talking to each other, and I'm like, help!"
Yeah. So my response, have you been to a black church? It's called call and response.
That's right.
Right? That's how it works. Right? Don't do it. Go on, pastor. Preach. Right? It's fun. We enjoy this. We love this.
Tell us your story.
Yeah. So my journey, I want to start with where I am now. And I have the most amazing relationship with our current police department, with our Federal Way Police Department. Andy Wong, I consider him a friend, a dear friend, someone that I can confide in, someone that I can trust. The people that are on my board, Kathy Schrock, love Kathy. She's amazing. And I have to tell you, my interactions and my encounters with the police department, especially the ones that have been in advancing leadership, I know they're public servants. I know when they put on that uniform and that badge, they are out to serve us, not to punish us. And so it is a very unique experience for me, considering where I came from. And I have to tell you that I didn't realize the impact of how devastated I was until during my program year, Terry's there, 2010, the best class ever, Cindy. Yeah, according to Cindy and our whole crew. Part of our government day during Advancing Leadership is that we take a tour through City Hall, and one of the stops is through the police department. And I remember clear as day, I took 2 steps into the police department and I froze. And I was paralyzed. And I couldn't go anywhere. And I didn't know why. It was the first time in my life I experienced an anxiety attack. I saw officers with guns, and I thought about my life in Los Angeles. I didn't feel safety, I felt scared. And so I needed to find out what is going on here. And so that took me on a journey. of trying to uncover what happened that day in that room. And so when I grew up in Los Angeles, between the ages of 15 and 17, I was pulled over approximately somewhere between 8 and 9 times. I've had guns drawn on me several times, approximately probably about 3 or 4 times. I've been asked, do I have warrants? Where have I been? Where am I going? I've had my car searched every single time. Not once did I receive a ticket. Once. Now, mind you, I was the ASB president of my high school. Not that that should even matter, but I was an honor roll student in the magnet program. Just for an analogy purpose, consider that being like Caleb Dawson having that experience, for those who know Caleb. What's that? Oh. Or Josh. Or Christian. The Dawson boys. But consider that happening to them. And how do they wrestle with that? And so I go through a journey, and I want to share something before I go any further. Sometimes intuitively I pick up things, so you got to mind me. This was not intended for me to take you on a guilt trip. It's a field trip. And for my buddy John, the way he shared it, empathy starts with proximity. If you're not close to it, how do you gauge the empathy of what's actually going on? For most of you guys in the room who know me, never knew this about me. Never heard this part of my story before. And so let me walk you through how I had to get to this place where I can walk in a room and call officers friends. Where I go to a happy hour. They don't drink, but I go to a happy hour with officers. And we hang out and we talk about life, family, and things of that nature. Well, the first thing that I had to unpack was realizing that I was struggling. I was angry. And then through therapy, journaling, prayer, counseling, it's realizing that anger is just a secondary emotion. I'm really hurt. But now I have to identify what is the subject of my hurt. And this is where I came up with this phrase, I wish they knew me. I just wish they knew me. Because if they knew me, they wouldn't treat me like this. And so I have to process this idea of how do I move past this idea of anger, pain, and hurt to this level of connecting so they can know me. And I have to tell you, that hurdle was hard. I think I'm not immune to, and no one else in the room is. We want to be right. I had justification where my stance was with the police department. It's not because I read it in an article, it's because I lived that. But I realized through counsel, friends, family, that Lawrence, you can't stay there. And I want to share this with a nation of people. You can't stay there. None of us. We can't stay there. I have to move beyond correcting people and learning to connect with people. And so from that journey, I stumble across this concept of the power of vulnerability. And I don't know if you guys heard of it. It's a lady named Brene Brown. I rave about it all the time. I encourage everyone in the room to check it out. And the premise is it's about emotional courage. It's learning how to have emotional courage. It's about realizing ultimately at the end of the day that the only way that we're going to truly change things in our world is that we have to be in a place where we're not quite sure exactly where it's going to go. But the room is safe enough that something good is going to eventually come out of it. The second thing, I had to learn how to take this frustration that I was feeling and turn it into fascination. And so I spent my time reading blogs about officers' wives and what the experience they had to go through. Learning about the day-to-day management of the job of a police officer, what they have to experience. Now, I know some people could struggle with that because they're like, Lawrence, why would you need to do that when you're the one that's the victim? But what I realized ultimately at the end of the day is that if we want to change something, somebody has to step up. And I have to go past that. And so this frustration of fascination turned into awkward, contentious conversations and learning how to be curious about those. And that curiosity got me to empathize because in proximity, I got closer to people, perspectives, situations that was unfamiliar for me. Lastly, this is the tough one. Because of my perspective that is broadened, I now had a responsibility to challenge those that I love dearest and that were closest to me. See, my hardest conversations aren't really these. They're the ones around people that I love dearly. And they say things, and I know them. And sometimes it's funny, but oftentimes it's not. And so my question for you in the room is that when you hear it at a dinner table, when you hear it at a function, an event, what do? Do you ignore it? Do you cower? Or do you say something? Isn't it odd that we're willing to say something that could be contentious or provocative to people that we don't have a relationship with, but yet the very people we do, we can't say something to them? That's backwards. And if we can do that, we can change a nation. I know it's lofty, but I believe it. And I have to tell you practically where I think it can start is this concept of a relational bank account. Now, I have to tell you, my best leadership stuff actually comes from marriage classes. Anyone who spends enough time with me, they will know that I eat that stuff up. And one of the concepts that I got actually from a marriage class was this concept that every relationship that we have works off credits and debits. Credits meaning positive encounters and actions that we do towards one another. Debits being negative. Think about this. If the encounter of a group of people and another group of people, let's say police officers in the African American community, is constantly negative, there's very little wiggle room for something good to happen out of a awkward, quick glance, quick on the moment decision that needs to be made. And if we can understand and we can walk into a relationship saying, I want to put more credits in this account, so that when those infractions happen, it doesn't take us into insufficient funds, because whether it's $1 or $1,000, if you don't have any money in an account, it's going to go negative. And this is the reason why some people can't understand that the smallest thing sets something off. It's because there's nothing there. So let's work on that as a community. And I'll tell you, I'm not just saying this. A week from today, I'm taking both of my nephews, because I live in Tacoma, I'm taking both of my nephews to the local police department, just so they can meet the police officers there. And for the officers to meet them, with the idea that here's a credit that can be put into your account. So that if there ever is an occurrence of some kind of negative situation that happens, at least you have this to lean on. So that's my solution. Thank you.
That's good. One of the reasons that we really felt it was important for Lawrence to start by sharing a story is, one, he holds a perspective that's not held by most of us in this room. His experience is unlike the experience of most of us in this room. But even more importantly, it highlights the importance of story. And what you just did is you listened to understand Lawrence's experience. There was something that resonated because of how attentive you were, and something struck a chord, and he's talking, and I'm looking at faces, and if people on Sunday mornings looked at me like that while I was preaching, I'd be a very happy pastor. Often it's more like, but our cultural climate does not foster listening for understanding. It fosters listening to respond. And what happens when we listen to respond is we move further and further away from truth, and we base our communication on sloganism. And we respond to what we think that slogan means instead of what is actually being communicated by the person who is speaking. Take, for example, the phrase Black Lives Matter. That has become one of the most contentious and divisive phrases that we hear day in and day out. And I want to talk to you for just a second about why white people, I said white people, we're talking about race. Lawrence is a black man. Sorry, I know it comes as a shock. I am a white man. I speak from a white perspective. I try to learn about Lawrence's perspective, but I'm going to talk from the position of my people. I'm going to talk to you about why white people need to say Black Lives Matter. Many of my friends are very comfortable saying all lives matter. And they're very comfortable saying blue lives matter. As a matter of fact, when they hear someone say Black Lives Matter, they say, you know what, all lives matter. And they feel very good about that, because all lives actually do matter. However, if you're comfortable with saying all lives matter, and you're comfortable with saying blue lives matter, that would suggest to me you're comfortable with matter, and you're comfortable with lives, so black is the issue. You're not comfortable with that word in that phrase, and that's not okay. And when a person in the dominant culture, a person who looks like me, refuses to say or listen to someone who says, Black Lives Matter, what they are communicating, whether they intend to or not, is your experience, your story, is not valid. My father died of brain cancer. And if I went to a rally or a fundraiser to raise money to combat brain cancer, and in the middle of that gathering where we are united for a common goal, you began to stand up and shout at me, you know what? Colon cancer is important too. Or all kinds of cancer should be cured. What you would be saying to, first of all, you wouldn't get much of that out of your mouth before I was up in your grill. But secondly, you would be saying to me, my experience is not valid. And the pain I carry from what I experienced is not deserving of an audience. And time again, people who are members of the dominant culture, the culture that is holding power, does not want to give voice to people who are saying, listen, my experience is important. When people say I'll just speak for my friends. I'm sorry. When I get general again, just upside the back of the head. As I'm talking to my friends in the black community, what does it mean when you say Black Lives Matter? Do you know what they're saying to me? They're saying, John, I'm not saying Black Lives Matter more. I'm saying Black Lives Matter too. And the reason I'm saying Black Lives Matter is because our cultural environment right now does not play out in a way that would say to the black community, you are as important as the white community. It simply doesn't. And I don't, if you need statistics, I can give you statistics. If you need stories, I can give you stories. If you don't think that's true, sit with a black man or woman and ask them about their experiences. People who look like me tend to conveniently forget that our founding documents include overt statements that say people of color don't matter as much as white people. As a matter of fact, we assigned a number. They're about 2/3. Not 2/3 important, about 2/3 human. These are our founding documents. And so there is in our DNA as a country a predisposition to elevate one culture and suppress another. You getting uncomfortable yet? It's not very fun to talk about, but it's true. And the reason that men and women who are a part of the dominant culture, men and women who are white, the reason that they have to say Black Lives Matter is because you and I have the platform that some people of color are still working and aspiring to. And if you want to be a person, as a Rotarian, who says, and I love that you open with this, in all that we're doing, we're asking these questions. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? If you are asking those questions in every segment of our community as a city of Federal Way, and when you hear the answer no, then you, as the Rotarians, are saying, then I must do something about it. That will begin to affect the change that we need for racial reconciliation and healing in our community. But if you don't do it, who will? Our founding documents laid the framework for it. Our following practices affirmed it, which has resulted in something called systemic racism. In other words, systems have been established that benefit the dominant culture, white culture, and it leaves other cultures at a distinct disadvantage. You aspire for truth. This is the truth. It's an ugly truth, but it's the truth. I'm sitting in a meeting with Dr. Campbell and everybody at this table, and some of the people at this table, and some of you as well, as she was working on the strategic plan. This is where systemic racism, one of the moments where I just went, oh, holy cow. And it just came home. She was talking about different demographics in our school district and how they're testing. And across the board, the African American students were testing below, underperforming when compared to the Anglo students. And so if that's happening across the board, we either have a genetic issue or a systemic issue. Does anyone in this room want to make the case that African American students are genetically inferior to white students? Then we have a systemic issue. And who currently holds the power in this system? You do. The men and women in this room, you are the influencers in the city of Federal Way. You are the ones who affect change. If you really believe that all lives matter, then you have to believe that Black lives matter. And if you're not, if we're not, we shouldn't be surprised that there are angry men and women standing up, showing up where we gather with signs that say, hey, don't forget, Black lives matter too. And it may make you uncomfortable that they're shouting. And it may make you uncomfortable that they're disruptive. But when someone is treated generationally without dignity, we should not be surprised when their response is undignified. Am I condoning unlawful behavior? Absolutely not. But when I'm seeing a person of color who is angry, and their anger is turned toward me, I have to ask the question. I have to stop saying, would you just have good manners so we can have a conversation? I mean, this is not how this is done. What am I saying? I'm saying, where I live, and in my world, where I operate, this is not how we communicate. Which is why I have to go to Lawrence sometimes and go, would you explain this to me about the African American community? Because I don't get it. Why don't I get it? Because I'm not part of the African American community. So who am I to say how they should be responding to injustice when they feel it? I'm not saying lawlessness is okay. I'm simply saying I don't get to judge a response because I haven't experienced their pain. I need to ask questions instead of pronouncing judgment. We're going to open it up for questions and dialogue in just a minute, but just in case you're not uncomfortable yet, I do want to talk about one other thing. The other side of institutional racism. I said institutional racism, systemic racism, degrades one and uplifts another. It takes from one and benefits another. In our culture, that's called white privilege. White privilege is another one of those lightning rod words that many of people who I speak with don't want to hear and they don't want to talk about. And to be honest, the first time I talked to somebody and he said, well, that's just your white privilege talk, and I thought, well, what are you talking about? White people are slow to let go of power because white people benefit from the power they have. And systems, society is set up right now where if you're white, you start the race, not at the starting line, but about the 25-yard line, probably in a 50-yard dash. In 1998, a woman named Peggy McIntosh was working at Wesley College on a paper that had to do with male privilege. Her premise was our culture is set up in a way that males are they're set up to succeed, and women have to work far harder to get to the same place that a man starts at. And as she's identifying that, this is one of the reasons I love her work, she became very introspective. And she asked the question, which very few of us ask, if men are set up, and I believe they are, with male privilege, are there places where my skin color is a privilege to me? So she could have had a long storied career on equal rights for women, and yet she said, even in the middle of this, I think there is a place where I am gaining unearned or undeserved benefit. She wrote a paper that was entitled White Privilege and Male Privilege, a Personal Account of Coming to See Correspondence Through the Work in Women's Studies in 1988. That wasn't a great working title, so now it's White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. She identified 50 points of privilege that she found that she benefited from as a white woman. Now, I want to take, how are we doing on time? We're not doing great.
No.
But I think this is important. I want to hand you something. This is from her paper. These are the 50 points. Lawrence, can you help?
Yeah.
These are the 50 points of privilege she identified that she benefited from. John, hold on. Lawrence said it very well. He said we're starting a conversation. So we don't have time to do the activity I had planned. But here's what I would like you to do with that piece of paper when we're done here. I'd like you to take it home, and I'd like you to read it. And I'd like you to read it with a pen in your hand, and I would like you to circle every place in those 50 things that she identified that the same is true of you. And I'd imagine, when I do it, I got a lot of them. And I want you to think what it is like for a person of color who can't say yes to those same things. And then when somebody says to you, white privilege isn't a thing, hand them this piece of paper and say, I beg to differ. Because when I took the time to be introspective and look at my life, I found that there are, in fact, places where I am set up to benefit and people of color are not. Now, if Lawrence goes around, as I think you should, talking to people about white privilege, he'll get about the same response I got from you when I said, hey, Lawrence, why do black people talk in movies? Crickets. Because we are going to assume the reason behind him asking the question or making the statement. But when someone who looks like me talks to someone who looks like me about shared life experience, there's no agenda. I don't get something out of you when you say, you know what, we really are set up to succeed in a way that other people might not be. I want to read this quote because we could have another conversation about white guilt and white this and white that, but she said something really important as she was doing this work. Here's what she said. She said, if you read through the list you can see how white people and people of color experience the world in two very different ways. But listen, this is not said to make white people feel guilty about their privilege. Let me say that to you again. This is not said to make white people feel guilty about their privilege. It's not your fault you were born with white skin and experienced these privileges, but whether you realize it or not, you do benefit from it. And it is your fault if you don't maintain awareness of that fact. Peggy McIntosh is a white woman. And what she was saying is, I have seen some place where my society is sick. And now that I recognize that my society has a sickness and I am in a position to affect it, it is my moral obligation, my responsibility to humanity to do something about it. And as Lawrence said very eloquently, because he took my notes,
I love this guy.
you started talking, I'm like, well, what else do I need to cross out? Affecting change is the responsibility of the dominant culture. But it must be done in partnership, not in isolation. We don't do for, we do with. It requires empathy, which is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, and empathy requires proximity. I spend time with people who aren't like me because I want to understand the world through the lens of people who aren't like me. If you want to understand something of what it's like to be a black man, you need to spend time with a black man. But listen, you need to spend time with a black man in black space. Okay? We've got black space, we've got white space, we've got brown space, we've got Asian space. Having Lawrence meet you at Poverty Bay, which he'll do, he loves that place, is not the same as saying, Lawrence, can I come be with you
At the barber shop.
at the bar? I'm working my way there. I'm not there yet.
Come to the shop.
I'm almost there, brother. I'm almost there.
Come to the shop.
2 more weeks. Because there is something important about feeling different, to understand when somebody is talking to you about feeling different.
I think a supplement to this idea of owning what's currently in front of us from an African American perspective. There's an author, his name is Ralph Ellison, and the name of the book is The Invisible Man.
It's a good book.
And it's a good complementary kind of read to what we just shared with you today. And if you do get an opportunity to read that, please reach out to me, because I would love to walk through that book with you. I do also want to share the future. I get the amazing opportunity, like Terry shared earlier, to lead a leadership program of adults and youth. And one of the things that I think it's my responsibility to talk about sometimes is the place of where white males are in regards to the support that they need. Now, I'm not going to champion the cause here, right? And I can see where things are going, but let me just share with you what I see. I see in my AOI youth program young white males that are afraid to talk and afraid to speak when diversity issues come up. And the very reason why is either A, they don't want to be seen as the racist white guy regardless of whatever they say, or 2, they're not even allowed to speak of it because of their privilege and where they stand. And so what happens is that they're ostracized. And they end up forming groups and communities on their own, which isn't healthy because it turns into a homogeneous environment. Now, I can tell you my political position on that, where I think those are a lot of Trump supporters, but we really need to address this. We really need to address this. I don't want any of our students to ever feel like they don't have a voice, that they can't share how they feel, and that their perspective doesn't matter. And so let's be sure to make sure that we make it an inclusive conversation regardless of where the position they stand. So that's my last thoughts.
No, it's not your last thoughts. You're just out of time.
Yeah, true. True.
You got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, I've got material, but
we've had a lot of conversations. Yeah. We've got approximately 120 seconds. Oh, sweet. I got 180 seconds. Anything you want to ask? Not like we have the answer, but yes.
I guess I'd like to share this with you. I lived in the middle of Seattle. My daughter went to schools with they were all right until she got to the point where she wanted to go to high school. And she insisted that she was going to graduate. So I became involved in the site-based management council that we had at the independent school district. So when the Rodney King meeting took place, we organized and we decided we would suspend school for about 3 days. And we would just bring in psychologists and ministers and everything to talk about racial relations. Two things happened with that. We were sitting around talking about how we're going to organize it. And someone said, one of the Caucasian or white parents said, isn't it great that this was an isolated incident? And one of the black girls, who got early entrance to Harvard, I should add, said, you don't understand. When I'm in the car with my mother and we drive past a police car, I'm afraid he'll pull us over and hurt my mother. It brings tears to my eyes. All these years later, it was 24 years ago that she said that. And then another incident that took place was one of the mothers, her son was coming home from church in a suit, and a police car drove up on the sidewalk, threw him to the ground, took him off to juvenile detention, and she didn't hear from him for 2 days. She started an organization called Mothers Against Police Harassment 24 years ago. That is incredible. And you know what? I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, I think the most poignant thing you've said to me is that empathy equals proximity. And you know, I really enjoyed being there, and I enjoyed my African American friends. Jessica graduated, and I went back to my white world. And I am so sorry I did that. That's, yeah, thank you.
Dr. Campbell?
One more question.
Really quickly, I just want to say this. When we think about who's in our schools right now, 7 out of 10 of our kids are kids of color. They're the future of our city. And one of the things that we should think about, I think often we go to the extremes of what happens when it goes really bad, but I think we need to think about it as being in the gray. And I think about when I go to Chamber, Kiwanis, and I go to all these places, we don't see those people there. And I think that's the part that we can start to think about. What is it about our spaces where folks like the folks that are the future, the parents of our children don't show up? And I think this conversation has something to do with that. Not just the African American community, but our Latino community and various communities. And I think what they're sharing with you is something for us all to think about.
Yeah.
I think the very life of our city depends on that.
Well said.
I would. My challenge to you, I think you should be hope-filled and excited about the future. I don't want anybody. My challenge to you would be to look at your life and your circles and ask the question, where am I interacting with people who see the world differently than I do? And if you aren't, you need to find a way to start. Because if you're like, where's my starting point? That's your starting point. If you listen to understand and not to respond, one of my very close friends will just say to me, John, just sit and listen to my pain. I don't want you to fix it. I don't even need you to respond to it. I just need to know that you care enough about me to listen to my story and sit in the hurt with me. And I think that's the beginning of how relationships in the communities heal.
And I've watched John in an environment where his aim is to win the person, not the argument. And if we can take that on, we'd be in a good spot.